What a fantastic and stimulating set of presentations we've heard so far. I hope to contribute a little negative transcendence, also known as historical perspective. I want to briefly present to you a history of collaboration between artists and scientists, intersection between fields of art and science. This is a vast subject I will only selectively consider. I'll use examples from the field that I've studied, which is the history of medical illustration. Could easily do this in the history of geology, botany, or a lot of other fields. And I'll do a little show and tell on conceptual scientific illustration, which actually sort of, in some way, anticipates and imagines, I think, some of the work that people do today. So, some deep background. Terms art and science in the 16th century, when this illustration was produced, only had the proximate meanings that they have now. In the 1500s, art meant any activity made by human hands that involved skill, and science meant any formally organized body of knowledge. So physicians often were said to practice the healing arts. Theologians contributed to the science of theology. So as a preliminary caveat, any kind of discussion about the idea of collaboration between art and science, since those terms wavered in their meaning in the 16th and 17th century, is a bit anachronistic. That said, there's a long history of collaboration between anatomists, physicians, surgeons, and visual artists, painters, draftsmen, sculptors. Anatomists worked closely with artists. Anatomy was a subfield in medical schools and art academies. And even in the act of dissection, there's some kind of corollary between holding the scalpel and holding the pen, and inscribing, cutting into the body was in some sense considered to be in the same, involving the same set of skills and observational prerequisites as drawing a line on a piece of paper. And there was an active interaction between those two. For many centuries, this collaboration prospered, again, mainly in the fields of anatomy and clinical medicine. In both fields, the primary purpose of the collaboration was to represent what the eye sees, the structure of the body or the pathological condition, and sometimes quite brutally, as you can see in this illustration from Govard Bidlou's Anatomy of the late 1600s, illustrated by a very talented and renowned French painter, Gérard de Larresse. Okay, and then sometimes quite beautifully, these things work, cleaned up, idealized, floating in air. In the previous illustration, just to go back for a second, you can see all the prosthetics of dissection. It's very ugly. Here, there's a halo of captions around the image. It's cleaned up, but again, the idea is they're trying to show in some idealized way the interior, the structure of the body. And the best anatomists tried to use the best artists that they could get, technique and compositional ability showed off, helped to even to produce knowledge of the body, artists who had a highly developed aesthetic sense. Now, if it's not too jarring, here's something completely different. And these are familiar type illustrations to you, conceptual scientific illustrations. Familiar, mostly unremarked upon, have instrumental uses. We see them in the science magazines, the health sections of newspapers, on the web, instructional videos, present scientific views of the material world and our material bodies using lots of different media, drawings, photograph, now, of course, computers, lots of diagrams, metaphors, iconographic conventions. They aim to visually explain processes within bodies and between bodies and over time, to dramatize statistical correlations, body functions, disease progression, natural cycles, executed in a variety of styles. We rarely think about this as an art, almost never as rhetoric, something designed to persuade the reader. In any case, its workings tend to disappear from view. It's sort of like goes directly from page to brain. At least that's what the artists and the makers of these hope. Now, it seems as if that kind of illustration has been with us always, but it wasn't. It was invented in the early years of the 20th century. Its first great exponent was Fritz Conn, a German Jewish physician and popular science writer whose career blossomed in the 1920s with the publication of Das Leben des Menschen, which is a popular anatomy and science book of the body. This was a 5-volume set that featured over 1,000 illustrations by many different artists in many different styles, sold over 700,000 copies. Huge bestseller of its day. And Conn also wrote about other scientific subjects over the course of his career, physics, but best known for his books on biology and the human body, including human sexuality. And the illustrated book was his stock in trade. So there's Conn, and there's one of his illustrations. And so his signature move was the prolific use of images. And these are from the dust jackets of the book. They're kind of synoptic illustrations of the kinds of moves that Conn made. Eclectic, employed a variety of styles, as I said, some conceptual, some poetic and elusive. And I've got to say, I'm going to race through this. Each one of these images, we could sort of go into great length. They're very rich. We could decode them and talk about them. Some of the artists were just workaday artists, freelancers available to him. They were all commercial artists, but some were quite sophisticated. And a lot of them have this surrealist, dreamy quality, almost a hallucinatory vision of medical or corporeal modernity. And these are illustrations that perform being modern. They're in a time right after World War I when the old order has been shattered, and there's almost an imperative to be modern. Conn wants to be a kind of impresario of the modern, do things in a different way than his predecessors did before. These are radically new. No other medical illustrations ever look like these. And they dazzle. And one aspect of the dazzle is that they really draw on the techniques of advertising and illustration that was already beginning to be featured in daily newspapers and monthly magazines. They recruit the eyes of the viewer. They're designed to draw you in, to teach you, to charm you in any way they can. And Conn was a very prolific thinker. He wasn't a theorist in any way, but in a sort of practical way, he invented maybe 15 or 20 of the tropes of modern scientific illustration that we see all around us all the time. And I'm just going to race through them and show some of them. And the first one, which you can see here, but I'll go on, is the body in modernity and modernity in the body, the way in which technology infuses us. We live in a technological world, a world of technological wonder and enchantment. It's all around us, and it's inside us. It provides all of the metaphors and the kind of visual vocabulary by which we imagine the work that our bodies do. So this is a wonderful illustration called The Blind Spot, which sort of looks like a projection onto the cityscape. Of course, these kind of buildings were very new in the 1920s in Germany, and not only is the cityscape outside the eye, it's inside the eye. Again, this is another kind of body and modernity, modernity in the body, the work of the heart in the course of the day, compared to the work that an elevator does or the work that these pumps do. Could talk more about it, but I just want to sort of generally show you what it is. The building actually is from New York. It's the AT&T building. It was the old AT&T building. I don't know what it's called now.